Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Here's a little koan to keep us company while we sit. The student asked, the Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sat in meditation on the Bodhi seat for 10 kalpas. But the Buddha Dharma did not manifest itself, and he could not attain Buddhahood. Why was this? The teacher said, your question is exactly the point. The student said, but he meditated on the Bodhi seat. Why couldn't he attain Buddhahood? The teacher said, because he is a non-attained Buddha. In other words, he's a Buddha already. He can't get anything. It's hard to get something you already have. So, what I really want to talk about is waiting, the notion of waiting. Now, if you're sitting on the Bodhi seat for 10 kalpas, kalpas like the length of an entire universe or something, you've been waiting for this enlightenment a long time. And no, it's one of the strange features of my particular karma is I do a lot of travel. And like most aspects of anyone's life, sometimes I agree with how much travel I do, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes I like it, and sometimes I don't. But that doesn't seem to matter. I do a lot of travel, and one of the features of travel is that it comes with an immense amount of waiting, and particularly a lot of waiting in long lines. But there's lots of waiting, sort of waiting on the way to the airport, you're waiting in the airport, you're waiting maybe in a taxi, you're waiting for the plane to take off, you're waiting for the delays, you're waiting for everybody to get out of the plane, there's just this immense amount of suspended time during travel. This is kind of true of anything, I think, but travel just makes it incredibly obvious. And it's interesting because one often has the idea you can make good use of time. But most of these little moments of suspension, in fact, you cannot in ways that you might think that, oh, I will use this to, do my taxes or read a book that I've been waiting for or call someone but this time does not lend itself well to that. And I've noticed over the years, the time ends up being hugely very similar to meditation, which also, you can try, you've probably noticed, you can try to use it to do your taxes or plan your, estate planning or do your garden or, but it's incredibly unsatisfying and usually just makes it worse because you're sitting there and then you start having ideas and then you start getting antsy and then, in fact, it's nice. Like just when we sit down here that you just give in to this suspension. You give in to just being here and not really knowing at this moment what you're supposed to be doing with yourself. And I was noticing there's something about being in line, part of what we're doing when we're studying Zen. So we're interested in the problem of suffering, how the mind makes for suffering. And Aside from family gatherings, I think standing in long lines is one of the prime avenues of studying what makes for suffering. Because let's say and this is another way in which I think it becomes worse. Like a lot of airlines I've noticed try to make the problem better by getting better organized. That now you have like 5 lines instead of one, and they all come with a number, and you'd think this would help, but in fact, it makes it much worse because nobody quite knows what line they're in, and it makes people incredibly suspicious of other passengers. So you're trying to like catch a glance at someone, are they in the right line? And if they're not, that would be really not okay because, I'm zone 1 and they're clearly zone 4. And so can they not? And you get people starting to like shove up and get worried that they're not going to get their spot on the plane. And this is sort of also made worse by the fact that everyone tries to bring more stuff than they actually, than actually works, but nobody wants to admit this. And so everybody wants to get their spot above the thing. And so you want to board before all the other passengers. And so this just gets to be shoving after more shoving after more shoving. And the anxiety starts to ratchet up, even though um, like anything else, everyone is going on the same little metal tube. Every single person has to go. And yet, I don't know what happens to us. It's very interesting. It activates all the features of the mind that somehow come up everywhere, that either I'm not going to get what I need, or I'm going to somehow, someone else is going to get it and I'm not. Or other people go way too far out of their way to be generous and make things worse, or so it just the self just pops up every which way. And particularly had an incident recently where there was an unexpected, very, very, very long line. And so you get off a plane and there are suddenly 4 lines, and you realize that you have to wait for all the other 3 lines to go, and that maybe you won't make your connection. And I don't know, as simple as it seems, standing in line, I was noticing both in myself and other people almost like the 5 stages of grief, First, you have denial, like, no, no, these lines can't apply to us. This isn't actually happening. Then you have, rage. What is wrong with these systems? Why can't people, how has this happened? Then you have bargaining. Am I in the right line? This can't possibly be. Does anyone know, like, did we actually have a different, can we get to a different line? Then you have despair. Maybe we're just never going to make our connection and we're going to be stuck here forever and we're probably going to starve to death because no one's handing out food. And then you have some kind of odd acceptance that happens where you just realize, like, we're just in line. I don't know how long it's going to happen. I don't know what. I'm looking at Christopher Johnson. I remember coming back from a retreat with him once. We were on the same flight to JFK. And this was post-pandemic where everything was a little screwy. And somehow our flight was late, and then we landed at midnight. And when we got to the baggage claim, we realized that about 10 flights hadn't gotten their baggage yet, and everyone was just waiting. And we had just come from a 7-day retreat. And so we were like, oh, no problem. Like, fine, no problem. We both have a 2-hour drive at least up to where we live, but no problem. And so we just sat in the middle of the floor and kept each other company and watched people feed their dogs and watched little kids run around and watched the whole world just started to bloom at 1 a.m. in JFK. And we thought, well, there's not really a problem right now unless my mind starts to make a problem by what are we going to do? What if we don't make it? What if we don't get our bags? What if we can't drive home? What if we, just see This happens kind of with everything. What if I don't make it to work on time? What if I don't know, what if my package doesn't arrive? What if I say the wrong thing? What if somehow you're just here instead? And by entering here, all sorts of avenues start to open up. Not just for, no, not just for it to be nicer to be here, but whatever might be on offer in that moment starts to come forward. And I came across, for some reason, because of St. Patrick's Day, there was all this, I found this story about strange incidences of luck that people happened upon. It's like when I was a kid, I don't know, probably second grade, you'd make leprechaun traps. I don't know if any of you ever did this, but in my very craftsy place of growing up, you'd make leprechaun traps, and then around lunch, everyone would turn off all the lights, and you'd wait for the leprechauns, and inevitably someone would catch a glimpse of one, and so and everyone would like, oh, did you see? Did he leave any gold? Did he? But it all required paying attention to see if you could catch a glimpse. And this story I found, this woman, I don't know, I think she was a high school teacher or something, but she started reading her travel insurance policy. And if you've seen how long these things are, only 12 pages fine print or something like that. And on about page 7, she found a clause that said, if you've read this far, if you've made it this far, you actually win $10,000 if you get in touch with someone. And it's true. And so she contacted them, and they said they had put, because no one ever reads their policies, they had put in this little phrase that she got $10,000 just for. And it struck me because, you think of luck as something as like falling out of the sky. Sometimes it's true, you might just happen upon something, or in my case with travel, I've been very lucky that sometimes people will let me onto a flight because I tend to cut it close, or someone will give me a ride, or someone will be kind to me. But in this case, it was really just she was attending to the life she had. She was attending more and more deeply to the life she had. And in a way, our own experience is a lot like that travel policy, that you're just attending, you're reading, you're companioning your own life. And you're never quite sure where there might be a little phrase that brings you all sorts of treasure and delight. And I'm going to read you a poem about that, I think. It's called Rare Bird by Jeffrey Harrison. Sort of also about waiting. While we were waiting for the movie to begin, my wife caught up with her old friend Marianne, and because I could only make out every third or fourth word, my attention fluttered off in search of something else, and landed on the 35-ish couple sitting 3 rows in front of us. The backs of their heads, and then the bare left arm and hand of the young woman, who kept gathering locks of her long, straight auburn hair between her middle and index finger, pulling each tress away from her head and through her extended fingers with a dexterous twist, and then letting it fall and gathering another, over and over, seemingly without thinking, as she chatted with her husband or companion. There was something about that movement, graceful but ordinary, not erotic, that made me look harder, until entranced I watched as those 2 slender fingers transformed into the flexible beak of a bird, whose head was the rest of her hand and body her forearm perched on the seat's armrest. As if this bird, without knowing, without the woman knowing, and through this repeated fluid motion was stripping some minuscule form of nourishment from the strands of her hair, as from the blades of seaweed, the way flamingos sift the shallows for tiny organisms. The bird kept feeding, and I kept staring, nourishing myself perhaps impalpably. I wanted to show Julie and Marianne, but not to interrupt my looking or their conversation. Then the lights dimmed and the movie started. I don't remember what it was, some documentary. I just remember that bird and how it felt, as though I'd made a rare sighting right there in the middle of the movie theater, of a species strange and beautiful, the finger-billed whimbrel, an item to add to my life list, if I kept one. So you don't know what you might be looking for. This is part of it. You think you're going to see a movie and you're stuck waiting, and then a nimbled bird beak appears and enchants you, and you forgot the movie entirely. And there's something kind of nice about the way that by giving in to waiting, and by eventually surrendering even whatever we think we're waiting for, sitting on the Bodhi seat for 10 kalpas, thinking you're trying to attain Buddhahood, that the world just opens around you instead. And no, I guess part of what it brings up as well is what's the meaning we're looking for in the moment we're in. Now, the Zen thing is whatever it is, whatever this is, the cool tips of my fingers, the blue in the shirts and your smile, your faces, the quiet of the suspension between the speaking notes, that's it. And then the question becomes, well, what do we have to set down to really have that? What do we have to step into or let down? And there's a woman who wrote an essay recently about waiting rooms, which is another sort of, you have waiting in lines for travel, and you have waiting rooms, which bring a whole host of other troubles sometimes, because you might be waiting for results or waiting for news or waiting for discomfort or waiting for you not know what. And this particular woman, for the last probably year and a half of that time, she found herself with a number of health things going on, and so she was growing very familiar with just what it meant to be in a waiting room. And she too had grand plans about, she was going to write poetry, she was going to get her essays done, she was going to, read books, and she realized every time she stepped inside, those things completely evaporated in her hands. Her mind just couldn't quite get there. And after about 20 minutes, she'd noticed that she would just get, enraged at all this lost time and the waste of it all. But then she started noticing that each time this happened, when she'd leave, something would have changed in her. And her poetry started to change. It started taking on more space. She started writing poetry for being in the MRI machine, which is not something she ever would have considered before. And one of the things she said about it was that she would see the floating nature of life and the whiff of mortality that accompanies it. When she's not engaging in all the usual things that she thinks she's accomplishing or keeping track of, or that accord in some way with her sense of who she is and what her life's about, things would suspend and open. And she noticed how the ritual of even being in a waiting room, and particularly if you have an MRI machine, that you have to take off all your clothes and all your earrings and all your everything that you normally carry with you as proof and track of who you are and what you're doing. And that it both opened her in some way, but that it also, by the time she would go back out into the busy New York street and get to put herself back together, she would feel much more alive and on and connected to her life. And let's see, maybe what we'll do, I'll read you one more poem and then I think we'll sit a little. This is called Waiting for the Barbarians. So I think one of the things about waiting, and I guess one of the things that distinguishes it from meditation for our purposes, is that you think you know what you're waiting for. You have an idea in mind that you're either for or against, so there's some kind of reaching or some kind of dread, however subtle it might be. And it starts to characterize everything that's in your mind. And it's kind of interesting when that just lets go. This is Waiting for the Barbarians, and we'll sit on our Bodhi seat. What are we waiting for, assembled in the forum? The barbarians are due here today. Why isn't anything going on in the Senate? Why are the senators sitting there without legislating? Because the barbarians are coming today. What's the point of senators making laws now? Once the barbarians are here, they'll do the legislating. Why did our emperor get up so early, and why is he sitting enthroned at the city's main gate in state, wearing the crown? Because the barbarians are coming today, and the emperor is waiting to receive their leader. He's even got a scroll to give them loaded with tiles with imposed names. Why have our two consuls come out today wearing their scarlet togas? Why have they put on bracelets with so many amethysts, rings sparkling with magnificent emeralds? Why are they carrying elegant canes beautifully worked in silver and gold? Because the barbarians are coming today, and things like that dazzle the barbarians. Why don't our distinguished orators turn up as usual to make their speeches, say what they have to say? Because the barbarians are coming today, and they're bored by rhetoric and public speaking. Why this sudden bewilderment, this confusion? How serious people's faces have become. Why are there streets and squares emptying so rapidly, everyone going home lost in thought? Because night has fallen and the barbarians haven't come. And some of our men just in from the border say there are no barbarians any longer. Now what's going to happen to us without barbarians? Those people were some kind of solution. One of the things I love about how Jordan and Michael play music is that there's absolutely no way of me wrapping my head around it. I don't know when it'll start. I don't know what it's about. I don't know how long it will be. I don't know what's supposed to happen. I don't know anything. I'm just being bathed with sound. And the best part about that, too, from what I understand of both of them, is neither do they. They don't know exactly when it's going to start or what's going to happen or what might be needed. Or so it's a window into living practice that they're sort of offering to us. And it's interesting. There was a play a while ago. I think it was in London and then came to New York, where it's called Encounter. And the way that it started was you're sitting, waiting. And all of a sudden, this guy who looks like a stagehand just starts kind of doing some things on stage. And you think he's just messing with things. And then he kind of starts talking to you. And you think, well, who's this guy? Like, is something wrong with the performance? And then pretty soon, without realizing it, you're in the middle of the performance. You think, well, how did that happen? What? Wait a second. And the performance itself is a story within a story. He's telling a story about a story, and then a story keeps interrupting. And part of what it does to you as you're in the middle of it, just sort of what we're doing here, is you're not sure what the real story is. Not sure which one is the distraction and which one is the one you're supposed to be getting to and paying attention and, learning something from. And they're just all weaving, and you're just there. And there's a lot of things that end up being like that. Meditation somehow opens you to, I don't know, forgetting what the real story is, forgetting the plot, forgetting what I'm supposed to be doing with all this, and suddenly things just start happening. And reality gets weirder and weirder. Like, I'll tell you a funny thing, and then I have a couple more poems for you. So I've been in the middle of traveling this last week, and based on the first layer of encounters that had all the long lines, I started thinking about, like, well, I don't know, waiting's kind of an interesting thing. Maybe I'll talk about that for Sunday. And on Friday, when I started heading home, this is where you have to be very careful what topics you choose, friends. This is a warning to you, what's on your mind. I'm sitting at the airport and everything is right on schedule. They're early. And pretty soon a strange announcement comes and says, my flight's 2 hours delayed. Well, what do you mean? And they said, well, all flights into the airport have been halted because the electricity on the runway has stopped working. And so until all the other flights have had to go land in other places. And until we can fix that, nobody can land, and then nobody can take off. I thought, never should have talked about waiting. Never, ever, ever should have talked about waiting. But, here we go. And as this went on, this finally sorted itself out. Plane had to go. They fixed the runway. Then weather stops another flight. Then there's a mechanical issue on another flight. Then this goes on for hours till like every flight in the airport is somehow delayed. And the airport starts running out of food. And, nobody was prepared for what's happening. And this just goes on and on. And I thought, well, this is one way to start studying waiting, right? And the interesting thing beyond what I said earlier is the state that arrives where nothing else can be done. And nothing is available except for being. And I realized, well, that doesn't happen very often. I'm too tired to read. There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to get. There's nothing to say. There's nothing to even have opinions about now. I mean, I could try, but it just seemed like, why? And so there's just this waiting. And in the waiting, the world starts to appear. People start to appear. Birds start to appear. Sounds start to appear. I want to read you one. This is by Joni Mikowski. And then we'll see what a few other people might have to say. This is just simply called Waiting. The cafe walls are covered with pictures of flying parrots. I take a table, rest my arms. The table gently tips. A dozen strangers sit and talk. All they do is lovely. And tea leaves circle in their cups like hawks above the valley. A woman reads a magazine, flecks ashes on the table. A man pushes his plate away while 50 angels pull. Outside, a light snow's coming down. It heaps the cars with pillows. The waitress hums a tune off key and stacks a plate with apples. I'm waiting on this cloudy evening in fumes of cake and diesel. So I find a book. It's not mine, it must be somebody's. It reads, Oklahoma is part of the Great Plains, rich with swaying grasses. Every winter is cold as death, and every summer blazes. I find that book predictable, so I go find another. But the shelf is nearly empty now, only one book there. A pictorial history of bullfighting written by Signor Pendu. It's always nice to be reminded that knowledge is abundant. The spine is stained with coffee, the pages in shreds and tatters, but it's chock full of glossy photos of famous matadors. On another page, 5 fearsome bulls wait beneath a tree. I read the arenas full of blood, sand, grace, and poetry. I thumb through pages absently while waiting for a fellow. A man approaches my table. He pauses, then says hello. I'm not quite sure if he's the fellow I agreed to meet. Does our memory make us strong, or does it make us timid? The sky outside is charcoal gray, the clouds in shapes like carrots. The air in here is charcoal gray because of the cigarettes. All the glowing cigarette butts are wee lighthouses in a row. Cars outside flick their headlights on to know the world they narrow. While waiting for God's fingertips at last to touch atoms, I count the ridges on the forehead of each sad madame. There's 14,700 and a dozen ridges. Where the land is flat as milk, the sky bends down and drinks. The teacups knock about like bones, the chairs like summer thunder. A woman puts her fork down, she smells of lavender. Out in the street, a car doesn't stop, so it bends another's fender. The woman runs out through the door screaming, "Our brains are starving." While waiting, I've forgotten why. I try an arcane meditation and I feel my body dissolve. The sugar is not so enlightened and floats in my tea like diamonds. It must demand its nothingness, demand to lose its dazzle. A gentleman on a bicycle pedals before the windows. Let's all turn into seagulls now and go everywhere the wind goes. Let's all be free as milkweed, free as the eye wanders, and inside every sugar bowl's an Oklahoma winter. While waiting for my rendezvous, I order a turkey sandwich and finally hear the thread-like voice coming from my wristwatch. Tut tut, it says, your 8-ball's sunk, life's moving on without you. Oh well, I say, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, adieu. But still waiting for their destinies in this stupid cafe, 20 tea drinkers get on their knees, clasp their hands, and pray. It's good to pray while the tea steeps, or whenever there's time to kill. The waitress prances like a horse, laughs. Life's such a tickle, she says. While waiting agitatedly in the paradise I made, ole, ole, the vases say and throw their roses down. So I draw my little sword, I kill the stumbling bull, and blood, sand, grace, and matadors fall onto my pillow. just sort of waiting in the airport. But you see, a whole universe appears whenever you lend your attention. You don't know where it might take you, what might be asked. Let's, I don't know, let's hear from, see if anyone has anything to say about waiting. Christina Schmiegel, you have anything you want to say?
Oh, it's all so familiar what you're talking about. I really kind of loved listening to it. Because I spent so many years flying back and forth between Shanghai and New York City. But so all of what you're talking about is so familiar, all the waiting in the airports and all of that, trying to be patient with the time one's inhabiting at the moment while one's inhabiting it. And the thing that really came to mind was it was a 12-hour flight. And I would sort of keep busy for the first while of it. Yeah, maybe I'd fall asleep for a little while, maybe there'd be a movie, maybe I'd knit. And then I get to this moment of impatience where I'd think, I can't take this anymore. And it was always at 6 hours. Like every time it was, I'd look at it and I'd think, I'm only halfway there. And I am so ready to be done. And then time would just stop and I would be completely fine for the next, till we arrived. It always struck me as so interesting. Like, what was it at that moment that I would let go of that made it possible to sit still for the next 6 hours, and the first 6 hours were unbearable? And then when it started to be possible to have Wi-Fi on the plane, I was really disappointed. I really hated the fact that I now had to make a decision about whether I was in that timeless space of the flight or not. It was no longer just a given that I had to wait. Now I had to, like, I could make a choice about filling that time or not. And I realized that I'd actually really gotten to love that empty space that I was sitting in. And there was a rare space in life where, yeah, I'm just empty in that kind of way. So, yeah, so thanks for bringing that topic up. It was nice to think about that time.
That's great. It reminds me about two things. One is it seems Wi-Fi makes that then there's a new liminal space called "Does the Wi-Fi work?" that happens constantly, which puts people in. There's no escape. This is the best part of this exercise. No matter what happens, there's no escape. But what you're describing also reminds me very much of any kind of meditation, but also sesshin, where there's, all sorts of ways. The first, particularly usually the first few days of retreat, or this might be the first few minutes of meditation, where you think there's that bardo state of what am I supposed to be doing, and is it going well, and should there be something else happening? Should it, would it be better if someone else were teaching? Would it be better if it was a different instrument? Would it be better if the birds weren't outside? Would it be, if I hadn't had the same? And then there's that moment that you're describing where just that something lets go, and there's just, whatever is here. And it may come back, especially over a longer retreat. You have moments that it comes back and lets go again, comes back and lets go again. But to just trust that this must be it, whatever it is, there's nothing else to get. George Foy, I see you in there. You have anything you'd like to say?
I guess I've done enough traveling that this resonated, but what really brought to mind was hitchhiking, when you could do that. And I did a lot of hitchhiking, and one thing you mentioned that really struck a chord was that being stuck on a corner or a crossroads or an on-ramp, you started to really notice these details that you would never in your normal life pay attention to, like a curbstone or garbage or a street lamp. And I actually remember those things years later far better than I do maybe where I was going or the car or the driver that picked me up. And I really observed that there was a real kind of dissolution of the ego because all you were was waiting, and all you were was the ride that might or might not ever come. And the other thing that really struck me was after spending a summer hitchhiking around France with my then girlfriend, and just waiting so many days. When we finally got back into what felt like the usual mode of travel, trains and planes that you could schedule, all of a sudden we realized that time had completely changed for us, and we could wait for 3 hours for a plane, and it would seem like 5 minutes. And time had suddenly become arbitrary, something that might or might not exist depending on how you were at where you were going, what you were waiting for. That's all.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I think that's exactly it. Thank you, George. We have a John Joseph somewhere around here. I caught him and then I lost him.
I love that
Ha!
quality that you mentioned.
Thanks, John.
Pops up. I love that quality that you mentioned, waiting of where there's you get to a point where there's nothing left to be done, and how the I don't know, his Japanese name is Daiso Chiso Buddha. It's one of my this koan that you mentioned this morning is just one of my favorite koans because there's just nothing left to be done. It's just what he is good enough. You know, it's really a beautiful quality. And putting all your finery and and going out and sitting in the gate, you know, waiting for the barbarians. But I've been doing a lot of traveling myself over the last weekends, and I came up from Southern California just this morning on a very early flight, and the TSA guy said, "May I see your ID?" So I said, "Of course." I take my wallet out, and my driver's license is not in the slot that it usually is, and so I'm fishing through my wallet, and I step to the side, and people are coming through, and I realized I didn't have my driver's license. I didn't have any ID, and he said, "Well, do you have a credit card?" Yes, I gave him credit cards. And he said, "Well, do you have a Costco card with your picture on it?" And I didn't realize how important a Costco card with my picture was. And I gave him that Costco card. But I was standing in line there, and there was nothing I could do. There was no license, and if they wouldn't accept it, um, then I don't know how long I'd be, maybe culpas, I'd be standing there still waiting, you know. So, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, John. The thing you make me think of as well is that, I mean, part of what it seems like we're often waiting for is to like become a different person or something.
Yeah.
Even I'm meditating, I somehow think that I'll be an improved version. And most of the time, I don't know, the thing we want is the life we have already. And entering it more deeply, it opens and changes, but you can't go in after that or you just get more seeking. And I want to read you one more poem about that, and then we'll have a little more sitting in music. This is by Billy Collins. It's called Oneself. And that says, "I'm trying to imagine that I am someone else, a grocer, an aerialist, a young viola player who travels around the country in a bus full of musicians, but difficulty lurks at every turn. I'm not really sure what a viola looks like. Plus, I have become so used to being me that I have become an assistant professor of myself. By the time I've learned to play the viola even badly, I would be close to death at best. And I'm so happy when I can stay home and pass the time in a leather armchair, volumes of Diderot on the shelf behind me, some low jazz on the radio, slow waves of memory washing over me and desire passing through me, like a tiny amount of electricity that flows through the nightlight in the bathroom. So maybe the way to overcome the ego is to start small, to imagine that I am still me, only I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and I go to the gym 3 times a week. Or better still, I do not go to the gym at all. It is up to me, after all. Maybe I stay home and listen to the news with an uncooperative look on my face, a smoker who likes to look out the front window as I do, or to sit in a leather chair under a long shelf of French literature, a fellow who gets tearful whenever the wind stirs up the leaves, who gets tearful thinking about his parents buried under the tall drifts of snow in a large municipal cemetery somewhere on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. I dream of being me somewhere. So much of meditation is growing comfort in this alive in between. A place before barbarians and ideas and opinions, where nothing about the world or ourselves has yet been decided. There's a science fiction book about a guy who spent his entire life waiting in line. And friendships formed, and activities and stories and cultures. By the time he got all the way to the end, there was just a little piece of paper that said, "You made it to the end of the line." And he didn't really know what else to do with himself, so he got right back in line with his friends again. So here we are, waiting for this.